Okay, welcome to the shorter version of the figure demo in Graphite. I'll have the time-lapse playing of each stage while I talk about the stage itself. We want to start with the small figure gesture sketch, and we want to do it in the upright corner, or you could do it in a sketchbook, but try to get it in proportion. And the goal for this stage is to plan out the gesture lines, basically look for any flow-through lines and see how the limbs and other parts of the body can be indicated with simple C curves and S curves and limited straight lines. And this will be a sort of mini rehearsal or roadmap for your gesture stage. And gesture is something we want. The figure, we don't want to make them look very stiff. That just doesn't make for a very beautiful drawing, so that's why we want to focus on this gesture part. Okay, the larger figure gesture, and we call this the gesture stage. We place the figure on the large plumb line. You can decide any kind of length for your plumb line, but the recommendation for Graphite is maybe work a little bit smaller. My plumb line was 25 centimeters if I recall correctly, and you could work 30-35 even if you want to work a little bit larger. It's fine. Now we want to place the figure gesture on the plumb line in the correct position, measure carefully, but we still want to keep it simple. That's what we did the smaller gesture sketch for. We want to use the same C curves, S curves, straights as we did with the small one, but this time we place them more accurately. And if anything, we would like to play up the gesture rather than simplify it. Of course, looking at the photo for reference, this is easier, but with the figure, it tends to be that the figure moves around in life a lot more obviously than a photo. And sometimes the gesture will change. Sometimes it'll be less gestureful, more stiff and still. And sometimes there will be a nicer gesture that you could try to chase on your drawing. And that's something I encourage. After the gesture, there is the construct stage. We start off with the construct of the outline, and we want to work within the limitations of the gesture we have already set up for ourselves. And we start basically breaking these gesture lines into something that is slightly more accurate than the initial block-in we sort of had with this gesture drawing. So we start breaking curves into straights and finding more accurate things on the drawing. And following the construct of the outline, we move into the construct of the shadow shapes. We then want to find those and compare, of course, all the shapes around those. We then want to tone in those shadow shapes, and this allows us to compare the shapes better. As we have some contrast to work with, we get some dark shapes to look at. And as you remember maybe from the bark demo, we can see some of those shapes as, small animals or whatever, and that helps with comparison. Now to mention with this demo, I actually forgot to tone those in before moving to the articulation stage. I do it only at the end of the articulation stage, which I guess is fine, but you could do that before, so it's easier for you to get the more accurate drawing. After the construct stage comes the articulation stage, and the articulation stage meaning finding the very precise and definite outline for the figure. After the outline, we move to the articulation of the shadow shapes. With the articulation of the shadow shapes, we don't want to make the shadow edges very sharp. We want them to be very clear, definite, but not razor sharp like the outline. And that's because we never see razor sharp shadow edges on the form on the figure. We don't want to do that on the drawing either. But yeah, we want to have clear shapes that we can then work off of. After the articulation stage comes the grouping of the darks stage. In the grouping of the dark stage, we take each object we see in the image. I'm now talking generally, not just this specific figure drawing. We take each object we see in the image. In this case, we could have two objects treated separately, the figure and the hair of the figure, because that has a different local tone to it. We group the figure in light to its own value, which is in this case paper white, and then the figure in shadow as a separate value. And we can work with a single tone for the entire image, or we could use the average for each area, as I did in this project basically. So for the figure in shadow, we want to go dark enough so that we get to model the lights more three-dimensionally. Because if we don't go dark enough, then we'll be limited by the range of light tones we can use in the rendering. The hair in shadow, it is quite dark here. So basically it's actually going to be in the light areas of the hair as dark as the figure in shadow. So that is something to keep in mind. And the darkest bits, the hair in shadow, those will be pretty much as dark as the pencil goes. And sometimes in other projects you might have a dark stool or table or a box or something the figure is leaning on, and those will also be treated as separate. And we want to work with the average tones. And it's good to establish the darkest darks at this stage as well. That way you actually know how to find your values. You can also use your value scale to help out with this stage. After the grouping of the darks comes the movement of tone. For the figure specifically, in this case, there is the fall of light that is a type of movement of tone. The fall of light meaning that as the light drops down from the light source, which we assume is high up, the intensity of the light source diminishes and the figure basically gets darker towards the feet. And we want to do this on the drawing by actually just toning in with the stump, and that will help us out in the coming stages. After the movement of tone, we move to the big form modeling, which we want to basically think of as modeling these simple primary forms of the figure we see. On the figure, we see basically cylinders, something that would resemble a box type of shape, and combinations of these. For example, the calves can be treated as somewhat cylindrical. We can treat the pelvic area as a box that has some round shapes to it, and the torso we can treat as a kind of an egg shape. The head would obviously also be an egg shape, but in this case it is in shadow. And at this point we still want to ignore any kind of anatomical detail we see on the figure itself. We simply want to catch the three-dimensional feeling of the figure. After the big form modeling, we enter the variations of the darks stage. The goal of this stage is, one, to adjust the values in the shadows and catch any variations in those, like the reflected lights, for example. Another thing to do at this stage is to fix the drawing in any places you see before we proceed. And this will also include fixing, of course, the articulation of the bedbug line after the previous stages, which can be quite messy. And this is to set you up for actually rendering the lights. After the variations, we enter the planes of light stage. The planes of light stage consists of 3 different steps. First, we have the lightest planes in the lightest areas of the form. In drawing, this is not really something we do because we have the paper white areas already established. We've done the big form modeling. There's nothing we can really add on top of the paper white to add more to it. And we don't really want to lighten things too much in the darker areas of the big form either, because that could ruin the overall impression of the light we've created. If we want to make some exceptions to this, we could do that during the rendering. In the demonstration, I tried to see if this works out, but in the end I just make the planes a little bit darker anyways during the rendering because they just work better that way. After the lightest planes in the lightest areas of the form, we do the darkest planes in the darkest areas of the form. And the order we do this in is because we want to basically emphasize the big form. So we do the darkest planes next to the darkest areas of the form. After that, we move on to the exceptions. The exceptions are kind of the majority of the planes almost in this image, because a lot of the anatomical information we see is in the light areas of the form. And this means we need to darken things in the light areas in order for us to see that information. We want to play those down though, because if we add something very dark into the middle of the light areas of the form, that will always do something to disrupt the illusion of form we've strived so hard to create here. After we do these light areas with the exceptions, we will move to the dark areas with the exceptions, meaning light planes in the dark areas of the form. For example, the head of the ulna in this case on the hand of the figure. And these two we want to play down while maintaining some kind of contrast. Following the planes of light stage comes the rendering of the lights. We want to start off with an area, say portion of the foot or the face or the shoulder, a small area like this, and then we want to refine it to the finish basically. We don't want to do it in a way where we just hop around the picture, because for one, it's annoying because you never sort of feel like you're progressing if you just kind of work the whole picture at the same time. You want to just be able to finish an area and move on, and at one point you will run out of areas to finish, and that's when the drawing is finished. Another reason for this is we're also practicing for the future here. If our goal is to move to oil painting eventually, this is the way we want to work in oil paint, because oil paint tends to dry, obviously, and we won't be able to work, maybe 10, 20, 30 hours in a row in one session while the paint is still wet. This means that if we just hop around and paint here and there and we don't finish it, the next time we want to tackle this area, we have to lay down new wet paint and again make those transitions. Because when we're making those transitions, we're using wet paint, of course. So it doesn't really work in oil paint unless you actually focus on a smaller area at one time and then take it to that finish. You can always, of course, fix mistakes afterwards if you find something that bothers you, but you do have to just repaint that area then. So we're kind of rehearsing with drawing, even though there is no strict need for this type of working. It's just so that you get used to the process. After the rendering of the lights, we then move to the rendering of the shadows. And this is where we basically just smooth things out in the shadows, because the variation stage should have been set up well enough that you don't have to change a lot of things, mostly just softening things and perhaps adjusting some small things, picking out dots and so forth. And after this we can call the drawing finished.